So for my nonfiction comprehension article review, I read the journal article Encounters with Informational Text, Perceptions and Insights from Four Gifted Readers by Dorothy Leal and Barbara Moss. Okay, so the purpose of the study was to identify how gifted students make connections to informational text and help teachers find more effective strategies for learning from text. The researchers wanted to understand the response of gifted students to informational text because this could help students construct understanding and meaning in content areas. So basically, in my own words, the purpose of the text was to figure out how these gifted students comprehended text, what processes they use and what strategies they use, so that we could, as teachers, effectively teach those strategies. The research question was, what do gifted students do when reading information text that enables them to learn so effectively, or learn so efficiently and effectively? So they just wanted to find out what kind of processes they use that help them comprehend the text so efficiently and effectively. So the participants were 4 gifted students. They were 8 years old, 10 years old, and then there were 2 12-year-olds. So they were from the Northeast region and then the Southern United States. So the reason why they were selected was they had to be highly or profoundly gifted, which all of these participants were. They also had to have an interest in informational texts and informational storybooks. Their interest and willingness to participate in the study. So they had to be willing to participate in the study. They had to have an interest in the nonfiction genre of books, and they also had to be very gifted. So the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old, they were a sister and a brother. They were considered to be very profoundly gifted. Their IQs were above 200, so they were very gifted. And then the 2 12-year-olds was a girl and a boy, and their IQs were around 160, so they were also highly gifted. So the brother and sister were profoundly gifted, and then the 2 12-year-olds were highly gifted. They were all very interested in nonfiction, so that wasn't a problem. So the methods that they used, what they did in this research study was over a course of 6 months, each of the chosen gifted readers were asked to respond to informational texts that were provided by the researchers. But before they started that, they had a beginning interview to get a nonfiction autobiography to kind of see where they were, what kind of books they liked, and what kind of perceptions and habits that they had to kind of start off. And then they interviewed and audio taped the interview once a week with every student, and they also had them write into their journals, and I'll get more into that. But for their first journal entry, they read 4 different books. 2 of them were informational texts and 2 of them were informational storybooks. So the first informational texts were called What Happens to a Hamburger and The Planets in Our Solar System. The 2 informational storybooks were The Magic School Bus Inside the Human Body and The Journey into a Black Hole. So after they read those books, they had questions that the students had to answer and write in their journals. So those 4 questions were, what do you think the most important information in this book was? 2, what did you learn from this book that surprised you? 3, what else would you like to know that the book didn't tell you? And 4, what would you tell a good friend about this book? So those 4 questions kind of let those researchers know how good their understanding was of the books that they read. So after they asked those questions, they asked 4 more questions. And those 4 questions were, what would you classify this book as, fiction or nonfiction, and why? What do you think the primary purpose of the author was in writing this book? In what ways does the information book differ from the informational storybook? And within each set of books on the same topic, which one did you prefer and why? So this kind of got the students' habits, and also let the researchers know which books that they liked more and which books they comprehended better and what they enjoyed reading more. The data collected was qualitative, and what they found was that depending on what books to use, it depended on the desire to learn, find pleasure, and stimulate their imagination through unusual information or humor. So their desire was varying according to what text type it was. The informational storybooks over informational text. So the students liked the informational storybooks much more rather than the informational text, which I think is kind of what we all would have thought, that the storybooks are more enjoyable to read than just the informational fact books or informational textbooks. According to Leal and Moss, engagement with informational text is not only possible, but probable when the text is able to include the following: unusual information and or humor, a depth of content coverage within a creative format, intriguing information focused on capturing students' conceptual interest, both effort and aesthetic purposes, mind-boggling details that stimulate the imagination, and accurate and appealing illustrations. So those are the kind of books that students are going to comprehend the most. So if you're trying to get your students to read more nonfiction books, maybe provide them with nonfiction books that have some of these aspects in them. So implications and classroom connection. Teaching my students to critically think about text could be very helpful to them. The fact that students will know how to critique informational text and think deeply about informational text will be very helpful. Bill states in the article, a strong implication of the study is that students could benefit from learning to be critics of informational books. Another implication that I came up with was that gifted students probably think a lot differently than non-gifted students. So this study is accurate and I think it's very helpful, but I also think that they should have done some of the study on average students, because average students don't think the same way that gifted students do. There's a reason why they're gifted. So I think that average students may not like reading nonfiction as much or may not be as interested in it, and the students that were involved in the study were very interested in nonfiction, and so I think it might be different for students who weren't ever interested in nonfiction, because most students don't like reading nonfiction books, they like the fairy tales. So according to Bill Honig, the effective reading processes or strategies of good readers can be explicitly taught, and doing so improves comprehension. So this quote refers to the article because what the article's main purpose was to find out those processes and strategies and how they could be taught. So now we know from the book that it can be taught, and as long as it is explicitly taught. So what we found in this article was what kinds of books were more enjoyable and were easier for the students to comprehend.